Welcome back, Natural Resources. We are going to finish up this unit with looking at some air pollution and air quality. And this kind of goes back to whenever we were doing the introduction unit and we watched an Inconvenient Truth. So this is kind of where we're looking at some of the climate change type issues that have to do with air quality. So first of all, we're going to look at the atmosphere and what the atmosphere actually is. It basically is going to be a blanket of different types of gases that are going to surround the Earth. Is it's something that you can't see, but it's there, and it's going to be divided into different layers. And we're looking at going from the Earth's surface to a height of approximately 348 miles above the earth or above sea level. So, when we look up into the sky, we don't see anything except for clouds or maybe airplanes or something like that. But there is an entire atmosphere up there and things going on that we can't actually see. So, that atmosphere is going to be what helps to protect and surround our planet. The lower atmosphere is going to be what starts at the Earth's surface. This is what we walk in and dwell in every day. It's going to be an average of 4 miles above sea level, so this is going to be a fairly shallow layer of the atmosphere. And this is a region in which the temperature is going to be, there's going to have a lot of temperature variation. Um, the temperature is going to fall and get colder as you go higher up into the atmosphere. And that kind of just makes sense because even if we in Cleveland County were to drive up into the mountains and to be on top of a mountain, it's going to be colder in a mountain area than it is just where we are down in the foothills. And so as you go up further into the atmosphere, the cooler it gets, which tends to make sense as far as lower lying areas are typically going to be warmer and more humid. So normally, per mile of elevation increase, you're looking at almost 20 degrees of temperature change. And so, if you're looking at going from Wilmington out on the coast all the way to the top of Mount Mitchell, you're going to look at a pretty significant temperature drop, and all that's going to be in the troposphere. There's other layers of the atmosphere as well, including the stratosphere, the mesosphere, the thermosphere, and the exosphere. And you can see the different layers and the different heights as to where these actually are going to be included. You can see Mount Everest here is still in the troposphere, but it is getting pretty close to the top of it. You see the clouds here. The aircraft are typically going to travel in that lower part of the stratosphere, but then you get out into some things like you've got like some weather balloons here, and then you get into some meteors, and then your spacecraft and satellites are going to be way out in the atmosphere. Mostly nitrogen. So we think about the fact that we breathe oxygen. But most of the atmosphere is actually not oxygen. Most of it's actually nitrogen. There's a lot of other gases out there, but those actually just comprise about 1% of what is in the atmosphere. So, oxygen is really only 21% of what's out there, but our body's utilizing that in order to help us to be able to breathe. So, much more nitrogen in the atmosphere than oxygen. It's just, we don't think about it very much just because our body is concentrating on taking in that oxygen. Carbon dioxide, only less than 1%, ozone, hydrogen, and several others less than 1%. Now, as far as different types of air pollution, we're going to look at some gases and we're going to look at some particulate matter. Air pollution is going to be just pretty much anything that is going to be in the air, in the atmosphere, that is going to damage the air quality in order to make it more difficult for us to breathe, more dangerous for us to breathe, depleting things like the ozone layer, those things that we looked at a little bit before. Air pollution, there's a lot of different means of air pollution. So any material can cause air pollution that's going to be suspended in the air. Gas, dust, smoke, pollen, and I just mentioned a couple minutes ago, we're mostly going to be looking at gases and some of those suspended particulates. A lot of your gas pollutants are going to be in the form of carbon. So we talk about hearing things like reducing our carbon footprint. And so that's kind of what we're talking about. Hydrocarbons, carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide. Carbon monoxide is what we hear about being released from cars and even from cattle. And then we, of course, breathe out carbon dioxide. Most of these are going to be released by petroleum industries, which is your oils, oil industry, gas and oil, and then burning of materials that contain carbon. We had an opportunity last December to go to San Antonio to a conference, and we drove. So it was a long drive, 16 hours, something like that. But as we were going through southern Louisiana, kind of the western Louisiana area, and eastern Texas, there were a lot of places where you could see the oil fields and refineries, and there's a lot of burning in those areas and those parts of the world. So they release lots of these hydrocarbons and carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide from those. Um, Oil refineries, steel mills, manufacturing plants still are going to be sources of air pollution, even though there are EPA regulations. Some of those have been walked back in recent years, and so there's not as many regulations as what there was, I'd say, 5 years ago. But it kind of goes back and forth in cycles, and so I would assume that we'll be looking at the pendulum swinging back at some point where we do start to uh, get a little bit more tighter reins on those carbon emissions again at some point. Um, Another gas pollutant is going to be sulfur oxides, and those are going to be sulfur dioxide and sulfur trioxide. Um, and this is what causes acid rain. So, whenever we think about the dangers of acid rain, this is what we're looking at. They mix with water vapor, and eventually those are going to condense. We talked about that water cycle, and so they're going to, as they are in the air, they're going to mix with the water vapors that are evaporating, and eventually they will condense into precipitation. It's going to affect a lot of wildlife, especially fish, because that rain is going to fall into surface water, whether it be ponds or lakes or streams, and those are going to be the animals that are going to be most affected by something like a sulfur dioxide. So an animal that lives in the water is going to be most affected by air pollution, which seems crazy, but it's true. Nitrogen oxides, this is what's going to be formed during combustion, and we're looking at very similar health conditions as far as nitrogen oxides is what we're looking at with sulfur oxides. Again, some issues with acid rain and things like that. Um, so for this one, when we're looking at gas pollutants, you've heard of smog. Typically, when we think about smog, you're thinking about smoke and fog and the combination of the two. We don't see a whole lot of smog in Cleveland County, but there are some areas where there is a tremendous amount of smog depending on how much industry there actually is in the area. Depending on the climate that they have. Places like California have got a lot of environmental regulations because of the amount of smog that they did have in the state. Places like China, tremendous amount of manufacturing over there, and because they don't have the same regulations that we have in the United States, they have a lot of problems with smog. I remember when the Olympics were last in China, there were problems with some of the athletes because they were having difficulty breathing because of the actual air quality over there. There's a picture, if you go back in the modules, of, I think it was India in the picture, and you had a before and after, and it was essentially before COVID and during COVID, during the quarantine, and there was a tremendous amount of difference in air quality. So these these phytochemical agents are going to be what's causing issues with the ozone layer, and a lot of this is coming from things like Freon and air conditioners, and things like spray cans, things like different types of styrofoams and the making of different types of styrofoams. And in recent years, a lot of that has been back down a whole lot. There's a whole lot more regulations on those types of things. The propellants and spray cans is what actually is going to be the issue there with those spray cans. Particulate matter is going to be things that are actually solid particles that stay in the air. similar to dust, similar to droplets of water. Of course, we know that droplets of water are not dangerous, but sometimes things actually adhere to those droplets of water, like acids, salts, pollen, things like that. If you've ever noticed early spring, um, you have a nice clean vehicle, and then the pollen starts, and then before long your vehicle is yellow. Those are things like what we're talking about as far as particulate matter, smoke from factories, ashes, burning trash, forest fires. Even when we have wildfires in the mountains here, sometimes we can smell the smoke from far away. We can actually see the haziness from far away. It hasn't been very long since we were able to actually see the dust from a dust storm that started in Africa. And so sometimes these things travel great distances. Some of the wildfires that are out in the western part of the country right now, some of those effects of that are being felt far away. So, these things can have a tremendous impact on the atmosphere, not just in one particular area, but in areas far away. Um, Another example of looking at suspended soil particles, or these solid particles, is scrubbing. And so the process of scrubbing is actually trying to remove some of this particulate from the exhaust before it actually goes out into the atmosphere. And so there are some companies that are actually doing their part to try to clean what it is that they're working with before it's released into the atmosphere. So the scrubbers are going to be used to mix a fine spray of water with those particulates to just help them lay. It's kind of like you have a really, really dusty day and all of a sudden it starts raining and then the dust just stops. And so that's what we're looking at right there. So scrubbing is actually a process used to try to uh, reduce, probably not eliminate, but to reduce the amount of solid particles that are released into the air. Two major causes of air pollution are going to be lead and mercury. And, we have all heard about the dangers of lead paint, mercury poisoning, and things like that. And those are some of the solid particles that we're looking at as far as those dangerous heavy metals that can cause lots of problems with people as far as birth defects, learning difficulties, and things like that. Lead itself is going to be a heavy metal that's used in, it used to be paint. There's really not as much lead in paint as what there used to be. We do unleaded gas now, whereas there used to be leaded gas. There actually was lead that was put into some um, plates and dishes that could also cause issues with people becoming sick from lead poisoning. So we don't really use those things as much as what we used to in the past, because it's just dangerous. Most uses of lead has been stopped, but you still can find some evidence of lead-based paints and things like that in old houses, where you may get down a few layers of paint and find some that still has some lead in it. So you have to be careful with the what we call lead abatement, and that's getting rid of that lead in a safe way. Um, Mercury. Okay, so I'm going to admit, as a little kid, I think I remember breaking a thermometer one time, and I didn't know that mercury was a bad thing. I just know that it was really, really cool to see the mercury on the counter, and I would put my finger near it and it would move. Um, Probably not the smartest thing. It may explain a whole lot, but mercury is also very dangerous for us. Can cause mercury poisoning. Eventually, when I told my mama that I broke the thermometer, she's like, "Well, don't play with that stuff." So I learned that it was not the most healthy stuff to play with. But loss of memory, birth defects, shaking are examples of what can happen to you with mercury poisoning. Thankfully, none of that actually happened to me. But there's a lot of issues with mercury poisoning with some types of fish. And so that's why you have to be careful, especially people who are pregnant have to be really careful with what type of fish and the source of fish that they're eating, in order to not be consuming things that have mercury in them that can cause birth defects. The effects of air pollution. This looks nasty. This particular picture right here, you can see some lungs that have been damaged by different pollutants and carcinogens. So lung cancer, emphysema, black lung disease, all of these are things that can be an issue because of some of the things that we breathe in, and so can cause tremendous amount of health problems in the future. Pollution to farm animals, pets, wildlife. I was literally watching a documentary the other night about Chernobyl. And if you're not familiar with Chernobyl, it actually was a nuclear reactor power plant in the Ukraine that melted down in the 80s. And there is still heavy pollutants in the air there, and it's supposed to be a place where nobody's actually living, but there are some people that still live there, even though they're not supposed to. But the pollutant levels in that area are still sky high, and they suspect that all the farm animals and pets and wildlife and things like that, there is fear about them going out and breeding with the regular population, but they're still there, and a lot of them are either not necessarily the healthiest things in the world. A lot of them develop cancer, tumors, things like that because of the health problems that they have just from being in a polluted area. Fluorides are damaging to animals, and again, we already mentioned acid rain, but that has a tremendous effect on wild fish populations. The climate, we mentioned this before. I'm not going to continue to spend a tremendous amount of time on it, but because we already mentioned it in the intro unit. But the greenhouse effect, we watched an Inconvenient Truth. Regardless of what people say about whether or not climate change is a thing, the evidence is there that climate change is a thing. It's just a matter of the best way to combat it. So we're looking at the greenhouse effect. We're looking at holes in the ozone layer, and it does make a huge difference in our climate. This year alone, as I record this, we are already on Hurricane Epsilon, which means we've gone through the entire alphabet of hurricanes and started on the Greek alphabet, and we're all the way to E. So we're looking at the most hurricanes in a hurricane season in many years. So climate change is an issue, and it's an issue that we really need to get a handle on. The air contents themselves are actually going to influence the climate in two ways, and we've already mentioned the fact that you've got the ozone layer, which is the contents. This first sentence here talking about the contents absorb radiation to protect the Earth. That radiation, we're looking at the fact that the ozone layer is going to be what absorbs those things. And when we have holes in the ozone layer, we have issues with radiation coming through those holes. And then again, the greenhouse effect, the contents holding heat against the Earth's surface, and that's what we're looking at there. So there's a couple things we've already mentioned, but lots of stuff out there about climate change, water quality, air quality. It's a changing time in our world. And so we have to do our part. And hopefully you learn a little bit in this course that helps you to maybe think about changing your carbon footprint a little bit. Next time we will start looking at fisheries, wildlife, ponds, streams, ocean life, and that's what we will actually be finishing the course up with. So we'll spend quite a bit of time on that. But I will talk to you guys very soon. Make sure that you check out the other assignments that are with this week's assignment. This is the only video, but make sure that you check out everything else and get those completed. Please make sure you email me if you have questions. I'll talk to you soon.